All right, sit down, get comfortable. Do you have your drink? Good, because you are going to need it. We need to talk about Elizabeth. And honestly, I don't even know where to start with this woman. I mean, we could start with the billions of dollars that vanished into thin air. We could start with the fact that she risked the lives of actual cancer patients with technology that was basically a science fair project held together with duct tape and delusional confidence. But we can't start there. You know where we have to start. We have to talk about the voice. If you close your eyes and I tell you to picture the CEO of a revolutionary Silicon Valley biotech startup, you're probably picturing a tech bro in a Patagonia vest, right? But then you hear it, this deep, baritone, authoritative rumble. It sounds like a muffled tuba. It sounds like someone trying to do an impression of Darth Vader after inhaling sulfur hexafluoride. That was Elizabeth. Or that was the character of Elizabeth. Because here's the kicker, and I need you to really internalize this. It wasn't real. The voice was fake. I know, it sounds crazy to even say it out loud. Who fakes a voice for a decade? Who lowers their register by 3 octaves just to order a coffee? But that is the level of commitment we are dealing with here. This wasn't just a scam, this was method acting on a Shakespearean level. So picture this. It's the early 2000s. The world is obsessed with the boy genius trope. Mark Zuckerberg is coding in his dorm room, Steve Jobs is deified, and into this arena walks Elizabeth. She's 19. 19. Most of us at 19 are trying to figure out how to navigate a laundromat or doing keg stands. Elizabeth, she's staring unblinkingly at venture capitalists. Literally, she didn't blink, which is a whole other sociopathic trait we'll get to later, and telling them she's going to change the world. She wears the black turtleneck, specifically the Issey Miyake black turtleneck. Why? Because Steve Jobs wore them. She starts drinking green juice. She creates this persona of the ascetic, brilliant, sleep-deprived monk of science. And the pitch? It was intoxicating. It was sexy. Goodbye, scary needles. Goodbye, vials and vials of blood. She claimed she had invented a machine, the Edison, that could run hundreds of complex medical tests on a single drop of blood. A finger prick. That's it. She told the world she had miniaturized the laboratory. She told the world she was saving lives. She graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, Inc. She was the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. And it was all a lie. Every single bit of it. The machine didn't work. It never worked. It was a box with blinking lights and a glue stick inside. But before the house of cards collapsed, she managed to fool everyone. And I mean everyone. We're talking former secretaries of state, 4-star generals, the media, Rupert Murdoch. She swindled the Waltons, you know, the Walmart people. So take a sip because we're going back to the beginning. We're going to Palo Alto. We're going to find out how a college dropout convinced the most powerful men in the world that she was the messiah of healthcare, all while hiding a secret that would eventually destroy everything. Okay, let's rewind. Before the turtlenecks and the baritone, Elizabeth was just Elizabeth. She grew up in DC and Houston, obsessed with success. And I don't mean I want to get an A on this test obsessed. I mean I want to be a billionaire obsessed. There's this story that when she was 9 or 10, a relative asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. And she didn't say astronaut or vet. She looked them dead in the eye and said, I want to be a billionaire. And when they asked, wouldn't you rather be president? She said, no, the president will marry me because I'll have $1 billion. I mean, talk about manifesting, right? But it's also a massive red flag. Waving in the wind. She gets into Stanford. Of course she does. She's brilliant on paper. She's studying chemical engineering. She's a President's scholar. She's got the pedigree. But here's the thing about Elizabeth. She wasn't interested in the process of science. Science is slow. Science is failure. Science is pure review and banging your head against a wall for 10 years until you find one molecule that works. Elizabeth didn't want the science. She wanted the result. She wanted the magic. So, freshman year ends, she works a summer at the Genome Institute in Singapore, testing for SARS, and she comes back to Stanford with an idea. She drafts a patent application for a wearable patch. Ideally, this patch would test your blood for an infection, diagnose you, and then release antibiotics into your system to cure you, all automatically. Sounds amazing, right? Like something out of Star Trek. She takes this idea to Phyllis Gardner. Phyllis Gardner, she's a professor of medicine at Stanford, a real heavy hitter. She knows her stuff. So, this 19-year-old blonde girl walks into Gardner's office, stares at her with those intense blue eyes, and pitches this magic patch. And Phyllis Gardner looks at it and basically says, "Honey, no." She explains the physics. She explains that you can't put antibiotics in a patch like that because the dosage required is too high. It's physically impossible. The laws of thermodynamics or pharmacology or just plain common sense say no. And this is the moment. This is the moment where a normal person says, "Oh wow, thanks professor, I guess I have a lot to learn." But Elizabeth, she just stares. Gardner later said that Elizabeth didn't argue. She didn't get mad. She just looked through her. It was like she just deleted Gardner's input from her hard drive in real time. She just nodded and left. She went to another professor, Channing Robertson. Now, Robertson was different. He wasn't skeptical. He was charmed. He saw the vision. He saw the Steve Jobs potential. He backed her. And with his blessing, she drops out of Stanford. She takes her tuition money and starts a company. Side note, you know what she originally called the company? Real-Time Cures. But, and I am not making this up, she made a typo on the early paperwork so it read real-time curs, like a dog, a cur, which in hindsight feels like a Freudian slip from the universe. She eventually changes it to Theranos, a mashup of therapy and diagnosis. Sounds fancy, right? Sounds legitimate. So she's 19, she has a company, she has an office in a basement essentially, and she has absolutely no idea how to build the thing she says she's building. She pivots away from the patch, probably because, Phyllis Gardner was right, and moves toward this idea of the cartridge and the reader, a device where you put a drop of blood in and presto, data comes out. But here is where the story becomes more important than the product. Elizabeth realizes she needs a narrative. She needs something that hits people in the feels. So she comes up with the fear of needles angle. She starts telling everyone that she's doing this because she's terrified of needles. She talks about how traumatic blood draws are. She frames Theranos not as a tech company, but as a humanitarian mission. No one should have to say goodbye to a loved one too soon just because they were afraid of a needle. It's brilliant marketing. Truly. It takes a cold, clinical medical procedure and turns it into an emotional crusade. It makes you feel like if you don't support Theranos, you basically hate grandmas. But she needs money, a lot of money. Biotech is expensive. You need labs, you need reagents, you need scientists to yell at. So she goes hunting. Now, usually, if you're a biotech startup, you go to biotech VCs. You go to people who have PhDs in biology. People who ask questions like, "Hey, can I see the peer-reviewed data?" or "How exactly are you defining the laws of physics?" Elizabeth didn't do that. She was smart. She knew that if she pitched to medical experts, she'd get the Phyllis Gardner treatment. They'd laugh her out of the room. So she pitched to, well, let's call them the old guard. She went after older, wealthy men who were incredibly successful in other industries, but knew absolutely zero about blood science. She got Tim Draper, a family friend. Then she got Don Lucas, a legendary venture capitalist, but an old-school guy. He was charmed by her. He saw the granddaughter figure. He saw the fire in her eyes. He didn't check the tech. He checked the vibes. But the real coup? The moment Theranos went from scrappy startup to untouchable force of nature, that was George Shultz. George Shultz, former Secretary of State, a titan of American politics. The man helped end the Cold War. He's in his 90s at this point. Elizabeth gets an introduction to him. She goes to his house. She sits down, looks him in the eye, lowers that voice, and spins the yarn. She tells him she's saving the troops. She tells him this technology will be in every Humvee in the Middle East. If a soldier gets shot, they can do a blood test right there on the battlefield and save his life. Schultz, he melts. He falls for it hook, line, and sinker. He's looking at this young woman and he sees the future. He joins the board. And once you have George Shultz, you have everyone. Schultz brings in Henry Kissinger. Yes, that Henry Kissinger. He brings in Sam Nunn. He brings in William Perry, the former Secretary of Defense. I want you to picture this board meeting. You have a table full of men who are practically fossils, men who have negotiated nuclear treaties, men who have run the Pentagon. And at the head of the table sits a 20-something girl in a black turtleneck holding a vial of red liquid, telling them fairy tales. And they just nodded. They didn't ask to see the machine open. They didn't ask for the raw data. Why? Because they wanted to believe. They wanted to be part of the next big thing. And frankly, Elizabeth knew exactly how to manipulate their egos. She treated them with deference. She made them feel like mentors. She played the role of the brilliant but respectful prodigy perfectly. She instituted stealth mode. That was her excuse for everything. Can we see the lab? Oh, sorry, stealth mode. Competitors are watching. Can we have the data? Stealth mode. Trade secrets. Does the machine actually work, or is it just making a whirring noise? Stealth mode. It was the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. And these guys, who were used to dealing with state secrets, respected it. They loved the secrecy. It made them feel important. Meanwhile, inside the lab, it was chaos. Absolute chaos. Employees were coming in, realizing the tech was physically impossible, and quitting or getting fired. The turnover was insane. The culture was toxic. Elizabeth demanded total loyalty. If you questioned her, you were a hater. You didn't get the vision. There was one scientist, Ian Gibbons, a brilliant British chemist. He was the chief scientist. He knew. He knew early on that the chemistry didn't work. You cannot, and I repeat, cannot get accurate results for 200 different tests from a finger prick of blood. The sample is too small. The blood gets lysed. Basically, the cells explode when you squeeze the finger. It's dirty blood. Ian tried to tell her. He tried to tell the board. But Elizabeth marginalized him. She kept him in a separate office. She stopped him from talking to the other teams. She siloed everyone, so no one person could figure out that the whole ship was sinking. But on the outside, to the world, she was ascending. By 2013, she partnered with Walgreens. Walgreens, the place where you buy your gummy worms and shampoo? They decided to put Theranos wellness centers in their stores. This is the turning point. This is where it goes from rich people losing money to actual danger. Because now, real people are going to walk into a Walgreens, get a needle stuck in their finger, and get medical results that are completely fabricated. And the Walgreens executives, they had doubts. They sent their consultants to look at the labs. The consultants came back and said, "Hey, this looks sketchy. They won't let us see the back room. They escorted us to the bathroom." But Walgreens was terrified of FOMO. They were terrified that CVS would get the deal instead, so they signed. They signed a deal with a company that wouldn't even show them the product. It's like buying a car, but the dealer says, you can't test drive it, you can't look under the hood, and actually, you can't even see the car until you pay me, but trust me, it flies. And Walgreens said, here's a check. Now Elizabeth Holmes is sitting on a throne of lies, valued at $9 billion. She has the money, she has the Walgreens deal, she has the world convinced she's the second coming of Steve Jobs. But there was one tiny, insignificant little problem, one minor detail that everyone seemed to overlook. The machine didn't work. Let's talk about the Edison. That's what she called the device, the Edison, named after Thomas Edison, obviously, because Elizabeth loved a good historical parallel. The idea was simple. It was supposed to be a sleek black box about the size of a toaster or a desktop computer. You put the cartridge with the blood in, and voila, science happens. But the reality the reality was a comedy of errors. Inside this box, there was a robotic arm, and this poor robotic arm was trying to do things that physics simply didn't want it to do. It was trying to pipette tiny, microscopic amounts of blood, but the arm was glitchy. It would jam, it would drop tips. Sometimes the centrifuge inside, the thing that spins the blood really fast to separate it, would get unbalanced. And when a centrifuge gets unbalanced at high speeds, it doesn't just stop, it explodes, literally. There were blood splatters inside the machines. Imagine that. You go to get a medical test, and inside the machine, your blood is basically painting the walls like a crime scene in Dexter. And the temperature. The machine got so hot that it was cooking the blood samples. You know what happens to enzymes when you cook them? They die, they change. So the results coming out of this toaster oven from hell were garbage. But Elizabeth, she wouldn't hear it. When engineers told her, hey, maybe we should make the box bigger, physics needs space, she said, no, Steve Jobs wouldn't make it bigger. So what do you do when you have a $9 billion valuation, a deal with Walgreens, and a product that is essentially a biohazard? You cheat. You cheat so hard. Here is the dirty little secret of Theranos, the trade secret they were protecting with their lives. They weren't using the Edisons for most of the tests. They were buying standard commercial blood analyzers from Siemens, big, reliable, German-engineered machines that every other lab in the world uses. They bought them, hid them in a back room, and ran the tests on those. But wait, it gets dumber, because the Siemens machines are designed for vials of blood, big scoops of arm blood. Theranos only had a few drops from a finger prick. So they had to hack the Siemens machines. They would take the tiny drop of blood and dilute it. They'd water it down with saline just to have enough liquid to run the test. Now, I'm not a chemist, and you probably aren't either, but even I know that if you take a sample and water it down significantly, you are messing with the sensitivity. You are finding things that aren't there or missing things that aren't. It was like trying to taste test a teaspoon of wine by dumping it into a gallon of water. Tastes like water. And that's what they were sending to patients. Now, you might be asking, how did nobody inside the company stop this? How did hundreds of employees keep their mouths shut? Enter Sunny Balwani. Ramesh Sunny Balwani. He was the president and COO. He was about 20 years older than Elizabeth. He made his money in the dot-com boom, sold a company right before the crash, and walked away with millions. He was also Elizabeth's secret boyfriend. That's right, the CEO and the COO were living together in a loveless-looking, sterile mansion while pretending to be just colleagues at work. If Elizabeth was the visionary, the good cop, the gentle genius with the big blue eyes, Sunny was the enforcer, the bad cop, the heavy. Sunny didn't know anything about blood science. He was a software guy, but he walked around the labs like a dictator. He drove a black Lamborghini with a license plate that said VDV, as in Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. I mean, the cringe factor is off the charts, but the fear factor was real. Sunny created a culture of absolute terror. He tracked employees' keycard swipes. If you weren't at your desk, he knew. He monitored emails. He monitored internet usage. They had security guards everywhere. They had bulletproof glass in Elizabeth's office. Bulletproof glass. For a blood testing startup? Who did she think was coming for her? Vampires? If you asked a question like, hey, Sunny, why are we running this test on a Siemens machine? You were gone, fired, immediately. Security would escort you out of the building. They fired people for negativity. They fired people for not being a team player. It was a cult, straight up. There was a meeting, get this, where Sunny and Elizabeth led the employees in a chant, a literal chant. They had them chanting, "Fuck you, Quest, fuck you, LabCorp," over and over again. Imagine your boss making you chant expletives at a competitor during a Monday morning all-hands. It's unhinged. But it worked. It silenced the dissent. The people who knew the truth, the scientists, were terrified of being sued because Theranos had lawyers. Oh, they had lawyers. We're talking David Boies, one of the most terrifying litigators in America. They threatened to bankrupt anyone who spoke up. So everyone kept their heads down, diluted the blood, and prayed they wouldn't get caught. Which brings us to the heist, the Walgreens deal. This is the part that blows my mind. Walgreens is a massive corporation. They have lawyers, they have experts, and they let this happen. Why? FOMO, fear of missing out. Walgreens was terrified that Elizabeth would take her magic box to CVS. They were so scared of losing the next iPhone of healthcare that they skipped due diligence. They'd ask for a validation report, and Elizabeth would say, stealth mode. And they'd say, okay, cool, when can we launch? So in late 2013, they start rolling out these Theranos wellness centers in Walgreens stores in Arizona and California. And let's set the scene. You walk into a Walgreens, you pass the Cheetos, you pass the greeting cards, and there's this sleek, spa-like room. It plays calming music, it smells like bamboo and deception. You sit down. A phlebotomist, who is often just a kid who took a 2-day training course, pricks your finger. They collect the nanotainer, a tiny little vial, the size of a pill. Now, here's the kicker. They couldn't actually run the tests in the store because the Edisons were broken, remember? So every night, couriers would drive the samples from the Walgreens stores all the way back to the lab in Palo Alto. Sometimes the blood would sit in a hot car for hours. Blood degrades in heat. Sometimes the tiny amount of blood would clot. So the lab techs in Palo Alto would get these samples and they'd be useless. What did they do? Did they call the patient and say, hey, sorry, we need to do it again? Sometimes, but that looks bad. It ruins the magic. So often they would just guess, or they would run the test anyway, get a weird error message, and just pick a number. Or worse, the finger stick wouldn't give enough blood. So the technician at Walgreens would say, oh, actually, we need to do a venipuncture today, just a routine check. And they'd pull out a regular needle and draw a regular tube of blood. Then they'd ship that tube to Palo Alto, dilute it, again, why, and run it on the Siemens machine. The patients thought they were getting futuristic technology. They were getting a standard blood test run poorly by terrified people on hacked equipment transported in a Honda Civic. And the results were terrifying. We're talking about people getting false positives for HIV. Imagine getting a phone call saying you have HIV when you don't. We're talking about people getting results saying their potassium levels were critical, like you should be dead right now, critical, when they were perfectly fine. We're talking about cancer patients whose clotting factors were being measured wrong, so their doctors were adjusting their medication based on fantasy numbers. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was assault. And Elizabeth, where was she while this was happening? She was at parties, she was on stage with Bill Clinton, she was getting awards, she was having dinner with the Bidens, she was carefully curating her Instagram. She knew. There is no version of this story where she didn't know. She was in the emails, she was in the meetings. When a lab director came to her and said, Elizabeth, we are hurting people, she looked at him blankly and said, I think you're just not a good fit for this culture. The audacity is breathless. It is a level of narcissism that borders on the pathological. She truly believed that if she just kept lying long enough, the science would eventually catch up. She thought she could fake it until the laws of physics decided to give her a break. But physics doesn't negotiate, and neither does John Carreyrou. By 2015, the cracks were starting to show. A few brave souls had left the company. A few anonymous tips were starting to float around. And one of those tips landed on the desk of a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, a guy who didn't care about turtlenecks or Steve Jobs or charming blonde billionaires. He just cared about the data. And here we are, the finale. We've talked about the voice, we've talked about the black turtlenecks, we've talked about the blood-splattered toasters and the terrified employees chanting obscenities at competitors, but now we get to the good part. The part where the house of cards doesn't just fall, it gets incinerated. Grab your drink, Maybe make it a double, because we are about to watch $9 billion evaporate in slow motion. So, it's 2015. Elizabeth Holmes is on top of the world. She's on every magazine cover. She's the youngest female self-made billionaire. She has a security detail that rivals the Secret Service. But in the background, a storm is brewing. And that storm has a name: John Carreyrou. John is an investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and unlike the guys at Fortune or Forbes, John isn't impressed by the narrative. He doesn't care about this Steve Jobs aesthetic. He hears rumors about medical malpractice, and he starts digging. And who helps him dig? This is the Shakespearean part of the story: Tyler Schultz. Remember George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, the man who had a Theranos tattoo on his soul? Well, his grandson, Tyler, worked at Theranos. Tyler was a bright kid. He went in there thinking his grandfather had invested in the future. He wanted to be part of it. But within weeks, he realized this is a scam. He saw the quality control failures, he saw the data manipulation, he saw the bullying. So Tyler does the ethical thing. He goes to his grandfather. He sits down with George Shultz, his hero, and says, "Grandpa, they are lying to you. The machine doesn't work. We are hurting people." And what does George Shultz do? He picks Elizabeth. Can you imagine? Your own grandfather looks you in the eye and basically says, "I trust this stranger with the fake voice more than my own flesh and blood." It's devastating. But Tyler didn't back down. He became a confidential source for John Carreyrou. So did Erica Chung, another hero in this story, who realized the lab practices were unethical and refused to run patient samples. These two kids, fresh out of college, had more integrity in their little fingers than the entire board of directors combined. So, Carreyrou gets the sources, he gets the documents, he writes the story, and Theranos goes into full attack mode. They threaten to sue the Wall Street Journal. They hire the scariest lawyers in the country to intimidate the sources. They even tried to get Rupert Murdoch, who owned the WSJ and was a huge investor in Theranos, to kill the story. To Murdoch's credit, he didn't. He let the newsroom do its job. October 15, 2015. The article drops. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. It's a bombshell. It details everything: the Siemens machines, the diluted blood, the failed proficiency testing. And what does Elizabeth do? Does she apologize? Does she say, "We're looking into it"? No. She goes on Mad Money with Jim Cramer and says, "This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then, all of a sudden, you change the world." She quoted Gandhi. She essentially compared her massive corporate fraud to the Indian independence movement. The narcissism is, and I cannot stress this enough, galactic. But the spell was broken. The regulators, the FDA and CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, swooped in. And this time, they weren't charmed. They inspected the labs, and they were horrified. They found that the Newark lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health. That is regulator speak for shut this place down before you kill someone. They banned Elizabeth from running a blood testing lab for 2 years. Walgreens, who had been sleepwalking through this whole thing, finally woke up, panicked, and sued Theranos for $140 million. The valuation? That $9 billion? Poof! Forbes revised her net worth from $4.5 billion to 0. Now, we move to the trial. Fast forward to 2018, Theranos shuts down. Elizabeth and Sonny are indicted on federal fraud charges, and suddenly the power couple is no more. They turn on each other. Elizabeth's defense strategy was fascinating. She tried to play the victim. She claimed that Sonny Balwani, her secret boyfriend and COO, was abusive. She claimed he controlled her, that he was the Svengali figure who manipulated her into committing fraud. It was the "I was just a girl who didn't know any better" defense. She showed up to court not in the black turtleneck, but in soft pastels. She had a baby right before the trial started. She walked in holding her partner's hand, looking like a sympathetic soccer mom. She took the stand for 7 days. And this is where the "I don't know" defense came out. Did you know the machines didn't work? I don't know. Did you know you were lying to investors? I don't recall. Did you know your staff was faking results? Sunny handled that. She tried to convince the jury that she was just the dreamer, the visionary, and that the details, the fraud part, were handled by the mean men around her. But the jury, they had the receipts. They had the text messages, texts where she and Sunny discussed business 24/7, texts where she micromanaged the logo, the font, the office decor. You can't be the CEO who obsesses over the font on the website but has no idea that the core technology is a box of lies. They also had the recordings. There were recordings of her pitching to investors, making specific claims that were flat-out lies. We are currently used by the military. Lie. We do not use Siemens machines. Lie. And about the voice, there were moments in court, during emotional testimony, where the pitch wavered, just a little. It slipped up into a... It wasn't a full gotcha moment, but it was enough to remind everyone this is a performance. January 2022. The verdict comes in. Guilty. On 4 counts of defrauding investors. Interestingly, she was acquitted of defrauding patients. The jury couldn't agree on that. I guess it's easier to prove you stole money from a billionaire than to prove you specifically intended to hurt a patient. But the investor fraud stuck. And then the sentencing. November 2022. The judge, Judge Davila, didn't buy the "I'm a changed woman" act. He looked at the scale of the fraud. Hundreds of millions of dollars. The betrayal of trust. The risk to human safety. He sentenced her to 11.25 years in federal prison. 11 years. She cried. She said she regretted her failings. But even then, she didn't admit it was a scam. She framed it as a failure of a business, not a criminal enterprise. She is currently serving her time at FPC Bryan in Texas. It's a minimum security camp. She's probably teaching yoga or working in the library. But the black turtleneck? That's retired. So, what is the takeaway here? Why are we so obsessed with this story? Is it because we love seeing the rich and powerful get duped? Absolutely. There is a deep schadenfreude in watching Henry Kissinger get played by a 20-year-old. But I think it's more than that. Elizabeth Holmes exploited a glitch in human psychology. She knew that we want to believe in miracles. We want to believe that a single drop of blood can save us. We want to believe in the boy genius or the girl genius who comes out of nowhere to fix the world. She weaponized our hope. And she did it with a fake voice and a box of glue. She proved that if you look the part, if you speak with authority, even fake authority, and if you tell people what they desperately want to hear, you can get away with almost anything. For a while. But eventually, you have to show your work. Eventually, the blood has to be tested. Eventually, the physics checks in. And when that happens, you better hope you have a better exit strategy than a quote from Gandhi. All right, that's the empty glass. That's the end of the saga. Look, if you want to be the smartest person at the dinner table and avoid investing in the next fake genius, you need to hit that subscribe button. I'm digging into another massive web of lies, and trust me, you don't want to miss that mess. Like the video if you think she deserved more time, or comment below if you think she was just a dreamer who got lost in the sauce. I'll see you in the next video. Stay skeptical, friends.